Hey everybody, it's Chief Meteorologist Brad Penovich. Hope you're having a great Friday. It's the beginning of a holiday weekend. We've got the threat for some strong and severe storms this afternoon between about 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. So just a heads up. And that leads to our weather school for today. Meteorologist Chris Mulcahy is going to talk about the different types of thunderstorms and how they form, because there's different varieties. We've got straight line, squall line, supercells, multicell. So Chris is going to talk about that. It's really perfect for today because we have the risk of some strong storms coming in this afternoon. So here's today's weather school. Enjoy.
Hey there everyone, and welcome to another riveting episode of Weather School. We've already learned all about thunderstorms, how they rise from warm, rising, moist air, and they continue to grow in the vertical until they eventually become a thunderstorm, producing thunder and lightning. But we're going to break it down even further. There are 4 types of thunderstorms that we're going to be talking about in this week's Weather School. Okay, let's do a quick review. How thunderstorms form. Well, first, it's all about that heat and moisture that rise up, and that eventually forms a cumulus cloud. That is the number 1 and 2 ingredients to any thunderstorm forming. And that'll continue to grow further and further up in the atmosphere, getting thousands of feet up there. And this grows in the vertical. Rain starts to fall initially, ice will start to form, and this is significant because the way that the process of lightning goes, these little bits of ice that eventually are going to have opposite ions, and then lightning's forming within the storm. This is also the point that the updraft intensifies. So the updraft is just pretty much the fuel for the storm. That's that rising moist air that continues and continues to rise. And eventually, the cooler air within the thunderstorm from the rain that's forming within it will form what's called the downdraft. The downdraft is responsible for the winds, the gusty winds that come from this. And whenever winds are gusting over 58 miles per hour, that's classified as a severe thunderstorm. So whenever you see those yellow boxes on our screen or on the bottom of your screen, it says severe thunderstorm warning for your county. This is the reason why. And there's one step further. Sometimes you can have what's called wind shear, which will allow the thunderstorm to rotate. And when this thunderstorm is rotating in the right environment, this is also called a supercell. But we'll get to that. All right, first out of the gate, let's talk about a single cell thunderstorm or an ordinary cell. You're also going to hear other terms such as pop-up thunderstorms and garden variety thunderstorms, to name what we're talking about here. Also, another word is also a pulse thunderstorm. So this doesn't usually last all that long. It has a one-time updraft and a one-time downdraft. So it goes up and it goes down. So in the towering cumulus stage, this is where it's getting extra tall. The rising updraft will suspend those growing raindrops until at one point it's going to drop out. And at that point, it's going to die out. So that's why it's called pop-up thunderstorms, and also popcorn cells is not an uncommon term for something like this. Now, these are usually pretty short-lived, only lasting about a half hour to about an hour. Very short-lived, very common during the summertime, see them in Florida all the time as well. They can still produce some gusty winds from 40 to 50 miles per hour, and it's not uncommon for these to become severe, but most of the time these are just general thunderstorms. It can also produce some small hail, some pea-size to even half-inch size hail. Up next is multi-cell cluster thunderstorms, or multi-cell thunderstorm, cluster thunderstorm, however you want to call it. So this is when several thunderstorms all move together, and the severe weather threat is usually low to moderate, and this happens usually along fronts or outflow boundaries. But wait, what's an outflow boundary? Well, first off, for an outflow boundary, you need a thunderstorm. As a thunderstorm continues to rain, that heavy rain, it forms what's called the cold pool. And that cold pool will eventually push outward, and that forms a new boundary called the outflow boundary. But as that cold air pushes into that warmer air, it'll drive up another storm from the same process, that rising moist air. And it's always that cold air interacting with the warm air that causes an imbalance and usually an unstable environment that leads to thunderstorms. And we see this all the time. Okay, back to the lesson. This is usually the number 1 cause of flash flooding, these type of thunderstorms, because they're also known as training thunderstorms, where one after another builds on itself, where you have the dissipating stage, the front line of that produces a lot of rain, and then behind that you have the mature stage, and then the towering cumulus behind that. So it acts as one big cell, but in general there's multiple thunderstorms that are involved with this, and that's why it's such a big rainmaker, because one after another another can continue to produce very, very heavy rain in one location. And it's not unorthodox for these to produce some large hail and also some tornadoes. So very common through our area and something to watch out for. And one of the more common features here is also what's called a downburst or a microburst. Okay, I think we need to go on another weather tangent. What exactly is a downburst or a microburst? So microbursts are very common across our area. We see them all the time, and they're actually the main culprit for a lot of our wind damage that we see in the Charlotte area. They form by dry air that interacts with that cold air from evaporative cooling. Evaporative cooling just happens when all that rain within the storm is evaporating. That's a cooling process. So that cold air eventually gets so heavy that it drops out all at once and it fans out in a bunch of different directions. That is going to cause some localized damaging winds, and they can be as much as 150 miles per hour. Now, in our area, they're typically about 60 to 80 miles per hour, sometimes as much as 100 miles per hour. And if you think about it, wind is wind is wind is wind. This could be the same category as a lower end tornado. So these can produce a lot of damage in a quick period of time, lasting up to a minute to several minutes. Next, some of those multi-cell storms can turn into what's called a squall line. So this is when all those storms arrange in a line, and this is just going to be a line of heavy rain and high damaging winds, usually over 58 miles per hour. And at times, you're going to notice the center part of it start to bow out. And this is called a bow echo. And these pass pretty quickly. That's the good news for them. They're not as much of a big rainmaker just because of how quick they're moving. But the reason why they're moving so quick is because the winds within inside of them are usually going up to about 50 to 60 miles per hour plus. And sometimes you could have some quick spin up tornadoes. What can happen is there could be a little kinks. That is a technical term, right? A little kink, a little squiggle along the line that could produce a quick spin up tornado that usually doesn't last all that long, or sometimes the bookends of that bow echo can produce some tornadoes. And these can last for hundreds of miles. And when that happens, it's called a derecho, which is a long-lived wind event. And those are often historic because they last for so long and they create damage for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles. Lastly, we're talking about the supercell. The supercell is a long-lived event, usually greater than an hour. It's a highly organized storm that feeds off this updraft, but the updraft is rotating. So it's a rotating storm, and oftentimes you can have what's called a wall cloud where you can see that rotation along it. And these go way, way up into the atmosphere and often have what's called an overshooting top. That means it gets to the top of the troposphere. That's where all the weather happens in our atmosphere, and it goes just above that line. That shows how tall that is. That could be as high as 50,000 feet. So we're almost talking about double the height of Mount Everest. And these, at times, have a good chance of producing a tornado. So whenever you see these, that is the ones you really have to watch out for. Usually close to 100% of the time, some sort of hail is being formed from that. And a lot of times you can have that hail cluster that is going to precede the tornado that could be involved with this. And usually it's around a 20 to 30% chance that a tornado could be involved with this supercell. So this is a very complex system. As you can see, heavy rain and hail and eventually that wall cloud that could lead to that tornado behind it. And here's what it looks like on radar. It forms this little hook, and oftentimes we can turn what's called velocity. And if you see the reds and the greens going away and towards the radar, that is a good indication that there's some curvature of this storm. And whenever you see an indicator like this, that means it's an especially strong tornado with this supercell. And supercells can also be broken down into different categories. One is a classic supercell. So that's one of the more common ones, but then there's also low precipitation supercells and high precipitation supercells. And the high precipitation supercell makes it extra dangerous because there's so much rain that is surrounding it, and oftentimes at that point we have what's called a rain-wrapped tornado. I'm meteorologist Chris Mulkey. Hopefully you learned something in today's weather school. Make it a great day.
Hey, Chris, thanks again for that. Again, we're tracking some strong, maybe some severe storms this afternoon. We are going to take the weekend off from weather school, though, because of the holiday on Monday. There will not be a weather school on Monday, but we'll resume on Tuesday through the end of the week as we finish up the last week of school weather school wise before summer break. So again, if you want to go check out the old episodes, go to WCNC.com or our WCNC YouTube channel. We got a complete playlist there now. We're pushing 50 episodes of Weather School. Have a great Friday, everybody.